Well, here we are again for the third part of this series. A series which I am perhaps sad to report is probably the foremost one responsible for burning me out during the latter portion of this month. Oh, I mean, it's Metroid, so I'm willing to, go there for it because it's Metroid. But at the same time, this fact that I had to play through the whole thing while painstakingly, thumbing through a guide, only to have to edit that footage, and then replay it, and then not re-review it, but this post-commentary thing, which basically doubles the amount of time to produce a certain duration of video footage, it's just been difficult. And it's not like this is the only LP thing I have going on right now, because I'm trying to stay on top of the schedule, but more and more I feel like the schedule's just not going to happen. The beneficially, PYR here, the Pyro, because I think that's what they were going for. The Pyro sector, as well as the following Nocturnal sector, are areas that I'm familiar with, oddly. I mean, the ones that give me the most trouble is the tropical environment, because it's a gigantic maze, and the Arctic, or ARC environment, the ice world. Hey, at least they didn't include ice physics to just make things infinitely more difficult. I still have little flubs and little goofs while I'm trying to maneuver. Those aren't too bad from a getting it in time perspective. What you want to do is avoid running down a hallway or a corridor that doesn't lead to where you want to go. Yeah, without the various suit, these things will knock down half of an E-tank. But there's a reason for that. They want you to engage them so that you can get a sense that your missiles just don't have enough punch. So when they give you the super missiles and you can one-shot them, you appreciate the super missiles for more. I mean, that's actually some clever game design, to be honest. The real issue is that I'm not looking forward to is that we have that coming up. We have the whole Arctic environment, and then another run through Pyro, which isn't so bad because we're not getting any items that run. Although I did when I did the rehearsal, so now there's like 3 items that are now floating values because I didn't get them during this run when I did during the rehearsal run, so I have to remember them later. So I'm now shaky on the notion of whether or not I'll actually make 100%. This has just been stressful. I'm going to appreciate if and when I get to Metroid Prime Trilogy that, time is not a factor. It's just an issue of getting all the stuff. Oh, thank you, computer. You all probably didn't hear that because the computer audio is muted, because this will be mixed with the actual recording audio. But I got a badong from my computer. Yeah, I think my methodology here, or maybe just by my statement that this is an easier section, is getting better. Because I got, well, apart from flubbing that Shine Spark, of course. Because this was 2 whole sections, and I breezed through it in 23 minutes, including the ship's computer doing its thing, which, as we all know, takes forever. I just decided to just let it run. Most people will hold that inaction is less objectionable than action. So if people are upset that it's slow, be upset with the developers for making it that way and not for me for not accelerating it, even though I could have. Because if I had accelerated, I would have upset those people who, you know, wanted to read it and are just too lazy to pause it on their own in the video. Besides, by allowing the ship's computer to rattle off the plot, these videos have been quite neatly paced in a nice 20 to 30 minute area per 2 zones, which is good. If I had sped through it, considering it would have saved 5 to 10 minutes there, I might have ended up having to do 3 zones in a given run, and that would have been more for me to mentally keep track of, because I also go over my guide before I tackle this again. I don't understand what it is about Fusion. Because I can't say with confidence that I could have gone through Super Metroid, or Zero Mission, or AM2R now, and still be able to get all of the items, especially in the completion time, because it's been so long. But even when I was frequenting these games, I could never confidently get Fusion done. Never. I still feel that it's probably the most difficult to try and facilitate that. This kind of highlights my point here, where the ship's computer is meant to guide players who maybe put this down for a while and don't come back to it, and maybe don't remember what in the hell is going on, because the ship's computer does tend to repeat itself. Because I swear this isn't the only time it's informed us that we're vulnerable to cold. We get it, ship's computer, we understand. Admittedly, again, this game is intended for young children with short attention spans and limited memory storage. Yeah, the data rooms literally just push us into new zones, which is, you know, helping to facilitate the exploration, but again, whereas in a previous Metroid game we would get a new ability, and that would unlock our ability to get into a new zone, here, we literally have to go to a thing, a security station, and unlock it manually, like turning a key. And it's all under the orders of the ship's computer here, because there are doors that clamp shut, like, I could not have left this area without talking to ship's computer. I think the aggressive hand-holding and linearity, because, I mean, in the original Metroid 2, sure, it was a linear experience, but you had paths that, oh, this is important. I'm picturing that, like, that has, like, a voice modulation on it that's meant to mask the identity. So something sus is going on, and the ship's computer is in on it. That's a nice plot thread, even if it is yet another alien-derived plot thread. Metroid borrowed a lot from the Alien movies, especially later. Shady stuff going on from the Federation. This game, Other M. And right after talking to the ship's computer, we have to talk to the ship's computer. It's weird how the palette for the Varia suit in this game is not remotely similar to the palette for the actual Varia suit. Oh, that actually is an interesting thought. Well, he spools on about the Ice X, basically. Because I was thinking, like, okay, so her fusion suit, which is predominantly organic, just regrew elements of her power armor for Metroid Dread. However, the SAX was originally created by sampling her biology, her genetics, and those of the organic elements of the power suit, and then replicating those as an X copy in the mechanical parts of the power suit. Now, it can replicate the machine parts as well, theoretically, because we find out something later. That's spoiler territory. But essentially, she absorbs the core X of the SAX at the end of this game, which means that those parts of the power suit that she had lost, the outer mechanical bits, would have been assimilated into the fusion suit, and then perhaps as it adapts them, she'd have the outer shell back. I mean, that turns into like a fan-splaining type of logic. Like, oh no, it makes perfect sense. You know, you just have to consider. Now, I find it funny that they talk about how this area is dark. Yet, it really isn't. Now, granted, of course, on Game Boy Advance, this would have had no backlighting, because Game Boy Advance didn't, unless you had the SP version. You have to get one of those stupid mirror things with the lights attached to it, which the advanced version always sucked. Because, okay, the problem with the Game Boy and the Game Boy Color version of that, like, magnifying glass with the lights on it that you'd snap onto the unit was that it would fold up, but it wouldn't fold up while it was on the unit. Because when it was snapped on, some of the space that the actual glass has to take up is where the Game Boy is now shoved into the thing. So you end up with this, like, square-edge, right-angled hunk of plastic and metal, and you'd have to split it into two parts in order to fold it down. Advance fixed that problem in that it folds down on the unit, but when you deploy the mirror doesn't actually sit very far from the screen, so it's basically doing nothing for you, coupled with the fact that it's also at a slight angle, so it's creating this inverted rhombus of magnification that, like, screws with the proportions. Of course, you could fold the mirror up and just use the lights, but then the plastic frame of the mirror obstructs the lights and stops them from hitting the screen. And I mean, they came up with a magnifying glass that was improved for the Game Boy Advance SP, which is just objectively an improvement, because it was internally lighted and could fold down into a nice pseudo-cube, like half of a cube. I don't know, some people didn't like how it drove your hands so close together compared to the actual Game Boy Advance, but I have big hands, and granted I was young, but I had large hands for my age. I didn't have any problem gripping it. It's not like your fingers are meshing in the back, or even if they are, who cares? Better support the unit, give it a finger hammock. Yeah, the mirror for that had this armature. It, like, snapped on the back of the screen, because it couldn't be in front of the screen when it was folded, because the SP had to fold shut. So it latched onto the back of the screen, fold the screen open, and then you had this kind of Z shape to it with two bars connecting the actual latch point and the mirror, which had its own cover. And honestly, the cover was the weakest point of the whole thing, because eventually the joint for the cover would get weak, and if you were, like, in a vehicle and it was vibrating, or you were on a train, or any kind of vibration, that cover would just flop over on the mirror. Or, not the mirror, God, sorry, the magnifying glass. And it would block the screen. You have to flip it up again, and you'd start playing to block the screen. These are problems from the bygone era when portable consoles were new and poorly refined. I mean, I don't know what brainiac it didn't occur to them that, like, the Game Boy would require backlighting in the first place. Not everybody's going to be playing it in a well-lit room. So, the reason for all of this banter, of course, is that this nocturnal environment, which is supposed to be dark, probably would have been much darker if it was on a screen that was being lit by ambient lighting, as opposed to being suitably backlit. But I don't even know how you'd record this if you were playing it on an actual Game Boy Advance. What do you got, like a link cable to USB? Can you jury-rig that? I don't know. I'm not that tech-savvy. I have to occasionally ask help on how to make Discord work. This is definitely one of the more esoteric X, bosses. It's literally just a giant inflated X thing. I get that the implication, of course, is that because it downloaded the Varia suit data, it has an armored shell, but how does giving it an armored shell make it bigger? And furthermore, it's not like a traditional Armored Core X with a gun-type weapon. It's just a standard X once you've destroyed the outer shell. Like I said, this is one of the more esoteric boss fights. That backdrop very much reminds me of SR388. Granted, that's actually a retroactive thing, because I'm referencing the SR388, like, right before the Metroid Queen's Lair from AM2R, which of course came out after this as a fan work, and fundamentally would have been inspired by this, not the other way around. I mean, detail was low in the original The Return of Samus, because naturally, it was a Game Boy game. It wasn't even a Game Boy Color game, although it was one of those ones that actually had a palette for the Super Game Boy programmed into it, because only certain games did. So you could plug that peripheral into your Super Nintendo, and then plug your Game Boy cartridge into that, and if it had a color palette programmed into it, you'd turn it into a color game, because this was all before Game Boy Color. Which beneficially was backwards compatible. You could play black and white games in a Game Boy Color, and they would work. Just checking the map and consulting my guide, probably. I've actually measured how much time I pause on average. It's between 30 seconds to a minute. And it's like, is that really worth editing out? It's like, it's half a minute where nothing is happening on the screen. Some people might be willing to tolerate that. But in this era of, what is it, the quick dopamine rush and 30-second videos, most people, especially the younger audience, they're not going to put up with that. Why is... They expect things to be happening constantly. Constantly. No stop. Breakneck speed. Yeah, I don't like the crawlers in this section because, the fake power-up, which was a crafty thing. But no, I don't like the crawlers in this section because when you damage them, they fall off the wall or the ceiling they're climbing on and just become more of an obstruction. Yeah, this is... Here's a weird part about the Varia suit in this game. The palette here is a little bit different from the palette when we see her in, pre-drawn for the elevator trips and so forth. And aside from that, both palettes look a little nauseating, like it's kind of a pukey palette. I mean, here it looks like a yellow and green. But when we get into the elevator trip, it's going to look more like a yellow on red. Or was it green on red? I don't know. Yeah, no, it looks like green on, a yellow. There's barely a red in that, but it's actually orange, I think. I don't know, we're going to get to that in a moment. The X can process data organically, which is a thing. I mean, people making the notion of, how can you process data organically? And it's like, the fact that you're thinking right now, that you're formulating those words, you're processing data organically. The whole function of the brain is to process data organically. It's, it's such a hilarious and tragic disconnect of, I mean, I can understand maybe the ship's computer's confusion, considering that the X-Parasite is kind of a gelatinous not sponge mold, slime mold. You know, again, kind of a John Carpenter's The Thing type of creature. But, I mean, honestly, that potentially makes it even more likely to process data again. It could turn its entire being into a brain. I don't know how it would sustain its function, but it could theoretically do that. Ah, yes, the plasma beam. Still can't remember if that was introduced in Super Metroid or 2. Suppose I should probably find that out by reading a wiki entry and not replaying those all over again. I have enough stuff to do. I mean, honestly, I'm feeling more burnt out by editing than LPing, because apart from this game, I haven't been doing a lot of LPing. In the previous few days, I've been doing a lot more LPing than I'm doing now. It's the editing. Because I've reached a point in Red Faction towards the end where the game gets blisteringly difficult that I have to edit out like 5 to 10 minutes of just constant dying. Or I have to speed it up or do a clip show of my deaths, which is the most effort. Shortest effort is just, I died from here to here, and then I did it. I beat it. Cut that out. The secondary to that is speed it up. And that way you get kind of a compromise of ease on my part to create, and the kind of dying clip show with the added bonus of me sounding like I'm one of the chipmunks. And then, of course, the hardest one is to just cut the deaths, like 5 to 10 seconds around each death, and then go from there. Which is why I don't do that anymore. And I mean, the reason why the speeding up footage takes more effort in and of itself is kind of stupid. Because, for some reason, the Windows video editor, which is what I'm using, if anybody's curious, if I put in accelerated footage at any point, it basically will not export. I have to export accelerated footage as a separate video using the duplicate function, and then reincorporate it where the original footage was to make that work. Which, if that sounds like a pain, it is. Now, I apologize for the disconnect where we get the briefing for what we're going to be doing in the next video at the end of this video, but my standard procedure for speed is to recharge on the way to the navigation console out of one zone, and then save, which is where I cut this, on my way into the next zone, so we just end up with the briefing here. Besides which, you can always divine what I'm doing in a given zone based on what I'm doing in a given zone. Context clues. And that's about it for time. I'll see you in the next one.